of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Juarez, and today I have a guest who is a student of what exactly would you say you're studying?
American Jewish history in the 20th century, and I'm interested in the left. And
Cool. Sweet comrade on Twitter.
yeah. And my first name's Susanna.
Okay, cool. I understand. That we're this is a fucking wacko podcast, so I definitely have lots of people that come on. They're like, "My name is Q," and that's it.
And I'm not sure how many Ukrainian nationalists you have following the pod, so I gotta be careful with what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of cool that we have to be careful with what we do in this show. It's fucking dangerous, man. Although I gotta say, I stopped getting death threats from MAGA chuds after a while because the news goes so fast. They all forgot about me. Anyways, so welcome to the show. It is my understanding that you're going to tell me a little bit about a character from history who's a Yiddish anarchist.
Yeah, his name was Sholom Schwartzbard, and he was a Yiddish anarchist, poet, watchmaker, Zionist. A lot going on there.
One of those is not like the others.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. Like, especially when I first started learning, I was like, "Oh, anarchist and Zionist. Not sure about that one."
Yeah.
But there were more than you think, because at the time, like, identity and political, like if you have someone like Chaim Zhitlovsky, they were just like constantly changing their political orientation and then denouncing people who held the same view they'd held a year before and just attacking them.
Well, I don't know anyone who's ever done that before.
Things have changed in the last.
Yeah. No, that actually kind of makes sense back when all that stuff was new. And we talked about that a little bit in this interview we did with Kate Pritzker about, how the whole Zionist project kind of is, in retrospect, it's like this thing that at one point sure made sense, and then kind of got off the rails or whatever. But anyways, so tell me about this guy, Sholom Schwartzbard. Did I get that right?
Well, like, you can pronounce, like, I don't know.
Sholom?
I'd use Sholom, though the thing is, I've never heard anyone else talk about him, so really any guess is probably fine. I don't know. In, like, talking about this stuff, there's, like, French, Ukrainian, Russian, Yiddish things that we have to pronounce, and I don't know how to pronounce any of them, and I'm trying.
That's okay. This is a podcast for idiots, so we mispronounced our own bullshit here. So no worries, because I'm sure no one else knows what the hell. I'm sure you're in the position of authority on this subject. So tell me about this person and why he is interesting to you.
Well, Sholom Schwartzbard is... He's just a real cool guy, and he was an assassin who assassinated a former... Well, like, the terminology for the Ukrainian government at the time is kind of weird. Like, he occupied, like, both... He was both kind of a military dictator, Simon Petliura, who he assassinated, and also the president of the Directory, but this was in the late 1910s when all of that sort of was up in the air.
Okay.
But Sholom Schwartzbard was born in what was the Ukraine at the time. He was a Jewish man, and his... Like, at the time, throughout his entire life, like, the Ukraine was just beset with pogroms, Cossacks and people from the government usually coming in and massacring the town's Jews, raping women, I don't know.
Like gangbusters.
Well, the gang were... Oh, God.
Whoa.
There's so much going on here, but Sholom was born in 1888. He's about 10 years younger than the guy he assassinated. I do know how tall he was too. He was 5'6", and despite his name meaning Blackbeard, he only had a mustache and some graying hair on top. But that's beside that. So he was born in the Ukraine. I can go into like what, because throughout his life, so his mother was the terminology they used was mauled while she was pregnant during a pogrom, and she died soon after delivering his second brother, the second child, like his brother.
Mauled.
Yeah, the book that I'm drawing a lot of this from is Pogromchik, the assassination of Simon Petlura, the complete authoritative story of the Ukrainian pogroms of 1919, their architect and their avenger.
Wow.
By Saul S. Friedman, because Saul in this book just goes off.
Cool.
But, oh God. So, throughout his whole life, and I'm not thinking of the name of the village, but he lived in Balta for a long time, but his mother died from the injuries from when she was mauled. And like it is interesting that Saul Friedman doesn't go into detail, because otherwise within the book he recounts the like rapes and murders and torture in just graphic detail for the 1960s.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for that's one thing. And then throughout his life, he went on to like kind of be, he became an apprentice to a watchmaker. He was involved, but he kind of just like moved around, and politically he was aligned with like anarchists to the point where he actually did meet and know Nestor Makhno in the daddy of anarcho-syndicalism.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, his life though was just constantly touched by pogroms, and the situation for Jews in this area was just always kind of nightmarish, because like, say the Russians want to the Imperial Russians want to conscript you into your army. If you're a Gentile, they would have taken you at 18. If you're Jewish, they took them as young as 12, but often even younger, and they'd be conscripted for 31 years and usually forced to convert.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of like, just not great times for anyone.
Right.
But no, and the pogroms really hit their apex in the 1910s. Like the estimates in the mid-range, I would say, would be like 100,000, and in individual villages it would just be like complete decimation. And he, according to like one of the estimates in the book, he lost 30 family members to the pogroms, including his father, his uncle Adel, his cousins, just everyone he knew in his life and cared about.
Okay, cool. So this is the beginning of like a revenge
This
film.
is his origins.
Yeah, I like it.
And he is known as an avenger by that's what he was called contemporaneously and called now.
Cool. Yeah, so this is like the first 2 acts of Old Boy or something like that.
It's remarkably similar. But I don't know, he did a lot of stuff. He tried to form a defense league in his own town, which was notable because most of the Jewish men in like the town in his area, they did not want to participate because they were, I almost say kind of learned, I don't know, it was a kind of a hopeless situation, so they're just like trying to live through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're not like, brave or whatever. It's just, when your life is beset by that, it's going to affect you.
Yeah.
And he was like, had different varying levels of success with that. Eventually he went to join the French Foreign Legion in 1914 and fought briefly in the war and got injured, and then just kind of convalesced and had a pretty chill time, like the only chill time in his life. And he got very injured, though. He married a woman named Anna, who was just also from Ukraine. There's not a lot about her, though she seems to have been a very understanding woman. Yeah, and he actually went back to Ukraine and Russia because with the coming of the 1917 and all of the revolution, he was extremely excited. So he went back there and kind of took part, but then got depressed again and went back to France and became a citizen and had his own little watch shop.
This is the watchmaker part.
Yeah. I've never seen anything saying if he was like a particularly good watchmaker, but he learned how to make them eventually, which was notable because his apprentice, his master and his wife didn't teach him for like the first 6 months he was there, and he was like, please have me do something. But yeah, and meanwhile there is Simon Petliura, or Petlura, depending on how you want to call it, and he was a Ukrainian nationalist and kind of a military dictator, and he was the he presided over the Ukrainian army and kind of made them a more formidable force during the time of the major pogroms, which he was even quoted on the time because he's like, I don't necessarily encourage the pogroms, but they're good for army morale, so I'm not going to stop them.
Okay. Interesting take.
Yeah, it's actually kind of hilarious these days because there's still for 90 years there's been a battle between Ukrainian nationalists who try to say, actually, he loved Jews. He worked with 2 of them and wasn't disgusted at all. And there was even this one guy, Jabotinsky, I believe, who had been quoted as saying something like, oh, I don't know if he was that connected. And then he had to take it back, but people to this day still quote him, so it just wasn't effective. But the thing is, so Simon Petlura, he was eventually Poland kind of took over Ukraine at that time in the late 1910s, and he rose up. They're kind of interesting because if you read this book in particular, they're both presented as kind of parallel radicals in their own way. But Petlura's radicalism is a little different.
Right.
But eventually he had to flee Poland because apparently the Polish government, everyone got sick of him, and they sent a noted femme fatale to try to murder him.
Petlura or Schwartzbard?
Petlura.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Petlura. No one cared that much about Schwartzbard.
Okay, I see.
But Petlura was in he was in Poland at the time because Ukraine was kind of a lost cause, and it was during and eventually he made his way to Paris, though, to escape from the rising red wave that was sweeping through the country.
Wait, so just back up a second. They sent a femme fatale after him?
Yeah, and nothing in the book or anything I've read has expanded upon it, so it just makes it sound like a job that they had.
That sounds so cool.
It sounds like good work if you can get it.
Yeah.
And he had a wife and daughter at the time too, and though it is still funny because the way it's presented as him leaving is just it's the femme fatale is sent and the murder attempt is made, and he's like, oh damn, I better leave. I guess they don't want me here. But yeah, eventually he made his way to Paris, where there was a Ukrainian expatriate community that he was pretty actively involved with, and at the time there was kind of a propaganda effort being Parisians, be sympathetic to the white Russians who have fled, the Red Army.
Yeah.
Which Sholom was sort of, he was briefly in the Red Army, but only in a kind of quasi way, which did come up later in the trial when they were trying to condemn him. But this is where we get to the really fun part of the story, because it's just a comedy of errors of Sholom Schwartzbard realizing who Simon Petlura was and then just making it his mission to fucking waste him.
Yeah, I love it. This is such a cool story.
It makes me happy beyond belief. So the thing is, Simon Petlura, he was talked about in connection with pogroms, and Sholom was part of his own community and had friends in Paris, and he had, surprise, surprise, he had a chip on his shoulder about the pogroms. So the thing is, though, he would talk with his friends, and it became kind of apparent that he had a growing obsession then with Simon Petlura once he realized, he was in charge of the government, in charge of the people who led the pogroms. When Jews pleaded with Petlura to stop the pogroms, he did nothing, and so he became like the singular focus, even though there were. Of course, other people who were responsible for the pogroms, they never faced any retribution or any justice for what they had done. And that was particularly notable in Ukraine. No one who committed these acts was ever punished.
Mm.
And such acts would be like in one village, they threw a dozen Jews down a well and left them to die. They would stab young children they would torture children in front of their parents and then murder the parents afterwards so that they would have to watch. There were mass gang rapes. It was just hell on earth. And so, surprise, surprise, Sholom's quite mad about this.
Yeah, hell yeah.
And he actually takes a picture out of an encyclopedia he has of Simon Petlura and just puts it up on the wall.
Yes.
And
throwing darts and shit at it.
Pretty much, he then even he was worried because he's like, oh, am I going to know what this guy looks like? But then the newspaper was very helpful and published a more recent photo of him looking dignified and older, grizzled from his years of war. And so he took the larger picture and then kept that on himself. And I think he might have just left the picture on the wall. We can't be sure. But then this just gets us to the part of where for weeks Sholom Schwartzbard with a gun and a picture just wandered around Paris asking people, are you Simon Petlura?
Oh my god, that rules.
And he found him several times. And one of the times it was at a Ukrainian expatriate event, and Nestor Makhno had to physically restrain him from attacking him. And the thing is, Simon Petlura was 5'7", which is, it's kind of funny how the Saul Friedman talks about it, because he's just sort of dunking on him for being 5'7", but then when he mentions that Sholom was 5'6", he's like this little man who never, who shouldn't have been able to do this great act.
They're an inch apart.
It's just like the difference between being 5'11" and 6 feet.
Yeah. Totally. I love it. I do like him as a vengeful, angry, short man with a mustache who's just fuming and balling up his fists and shit.
He was our first short king, really.
Oh, yeah. He was Jabuki.
But yeah, he went around several times. He found him, but he was kind of nervous because he was like, oh, well, he's with his family right now. I don't want to kill him while he's next to his wife and baby, because he'd had a new baby too, which is pretty. It comes up later during the trial, but eventually he did find him alone on the street, and he went up with him with the picture in hand and said, "Are you Simon Petlura?" And Simon Petlura just immediately raised his cane to try to hit him, and Sholom, to his own testimony, said that he shot him 5 times and then kept unloading the gun on the ground and shot him 2 more while he was on the ground, and then his last words were just kind of shrieking.
Oh my god, with the old-timey gun that it takes forever to reload and shit.
And just people watched it. It was a crowded place in the middle of the day. He did not care. He even left a letter. He put a letter in the post office to his wife and just being like, know this, I acted alone. I did this. Because the other recurring theme is just Sholom Schwartzbard. He was just always very proud of the fact that he did this, and was always 100% like, yes, I did this. I planned it for a long time, and just never stopped talking about it.
And that is definitely important as we get into the next part of the story, right?
Well, it even because he was apprehended, like, he didn't try to struggle. He just kind of went along with the police, and they protected him from the mob because the mob was like, oh, this man just killed a guy. And they took him to the prison, and he was a little bit sad because he wasn't sure he'd killed the right guy because, you know, Simon didn't have a chance to confirm. And so he was at the jailhouse.
Wait, sorry, I need to stop there. He wasn't sure he killed the right guy because he walked up on him and was like, "Are you Simon?" And then he just shot him anyway.
Well, the thing is, Simon, all he did was just raise his cane as if he was going to hit him, and Sholom was just like, "I guess I'll take that."
Okay, that's when he pulled out the taxi driver gun.
But also, anyone who goes up and asks you if you are someone with a gun, it would be understandable probably not to answer.
Okay, so that's interesting. But he did indeed get Simon.
Yeah, and also the one other thing is, like, Simon's friends did, like, constantly talk about how obviously Jewish Sholom was, so maybe Simon was also worried about that. Oh my God, it's so good though, because when he goes to the jail, Simon didn't die immediately on the scene and was taken to the hospital, but then the police confirmed to him, and they're like, oh, hey, your victim died, Simon Petliura. And that's when he then goes up to the gendarme and hugs him, and he said, oh, I'm so happy I did it. I killed a murderer. That's what he said a lot. He's like, I have killed an assassin.
Fair enough.
Well, he's not wrong.
Yeah. And
he's then in jail for about a year or a year and a half, and he's kind of depressed, but the police do weirdly, I'm very anti-cop, but it is hilarious because they would take him newspapers of, like, him being written about in his crime and be like, look, you're in the paper, people are talking about you, and try to cheer him up, which 1920, this happened, by the way, May 25th, 1926, and for reference, at this time, people assassinating people they held responsible for genocide was actually fairly common because it happened with an Armenian fellow, and also, I believe, an Armenian woman had shot someone and been successfully defended by one of our key players, Henri Torres, who I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but he's a cool French former communist Jewish lawyer.
Cool.
And yeah, and this was very much in his wheelhouse, was defending assassins. And I can go and talk about the trial, because the trial, it lasted 12 days, but everyone involved was like, oh, this trial's never going to end, and everyone hated it. And there were even, like, at one point, Henri Torres is like, there were 80 more people I could have called, but I decided not to and just for, like, a rhetorical flourish, because Henri Torres was just constantly doing the most.
So this is like an old-timey, like, OJ trial sort of thing, like a big celebrity circus.
Imagine, like, OJ, but there's, like, 50 Cato Kalin, and they're all here to talk about genocide.
I love it. I want to make this a movie so bad.
We need, like, several movies about Sholom Schwartzbard. God, but who would play him? Like, Jason Schwartzman's around the same height. Doesn't quite look like him, but maybe Sophia Coppola, and it could just be the longest and most.
He was Daniel Day-Lewis in my head for a minute.
Oh, that would be.
But he's retired, as we know.
Yeah, though the thing is, like, Sholom Schwartzbard was, like, in his 30s, and being in your 30s in the 1920s meant your hair was already gray and you looked like you were dying. So he could have, like, we could have an older actor for this.
Yeah, there we go.
But yeah, so the trial, like, at least according to the books I've read, for the time 1920s French courts, you could just call as many witnesses as you wanted, and they could just have the most remote connection to what was happening. And that's kind of how this trial played out, because the defense tried to prove the defense, Henri Torres, who was really, like, one of the greatest lawyers in France, like, there were 3 really notable ones at the time. He just switched the whole trial to being about whether or not Simon Petliura was guilty of the pogroms, rather than, like, because basically, like, his Sholom the entire time just was always saying, like, yes, I did this. Simon Petliora was a murderer. And they even, like, God, the prosecution, like, even tried to say something, being like, oh, but didn't Simon send the Jews somewhere? And Sholom said he sent the Jews to heaven. And just angrily.
If I said I was an assassin, you would agree.
I have this 1927 press photo, and it has like a little bit on the back, and it says, defendant Sholom Schwartzbard shrieks his guilt, and it talks about how ugly he is for some reason, which I think he's pretty hot. I don't know.
Schwartzbard?
Yeah, he's got that bad boy kind of.
He talks about how ugly he himself is?
No, just the press at the
okay,
time, because he was.
I thought he was shrieking in the courtroom.
No,
I killed him, and I'm an ugly man.
Oh man. And also the press clipping talks about the Slavic faces of the courtroom, because the court was, to be fair, packed with Slavic people. Okay. So, it's good that they let us know. And yeah, the thing is, people at this time, this was probably an OJ level case, because the amount of people who wanted to speak on the behalf of Sholom Schwartzbard was just like, there's like this huge list, including Albert Einstein.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Which, I wish he'd been a part of it. But yeah, during the trial, the prosecution tried to kind of claim, like, oh, well, Schwartzbard, didn't you have, like, you probably had co-conspirators, and they brought in witnesses who were friends with Petliora to be like, I saw some Jews hanging around us at lunch, so I think there's a conspiracy. One of them looked like Schwartzbard, and I'm like, I don't trust them to be able to tell Jewish people apart.
Yeah.
And, so they tried to do that. And weirdly enough, both sides declined to have his wife on the stand, even though she would have been the obvious one to dispute this, because he said multiple times, there's no one else involved. But they just kind of wanted to, like, both sides were like, we're going to spare her going through this, which was just like kind of like some benevolent misogyny.
The past.
What a time. Oh my God. But yeah, and so with the trial, though, they brought in historians, like this was more on Henri Torres' side, but he brought in historians, and he brought in victims of the pogrom, including one woman, Haya Greenberg, who had lost her arm and been assaulted. Her story was notable because she and her family had a tenant, and her family, I believe, was killed in front of her, and she tried to claim, I'm not Jewish, I'm the tenant's daughter, and the tenant just did not care and was like, no, she's lying. And the soldier said to her this one just batshit Ukrainian phrase, like, a pig and a duck are not the same, and then proceeded to assault her. And she lost her arm, because there was a lot of what we hear about was also really recorded during this trial, because it's kind of not dissimilar to the Nuremberg trials, and just like holding people accountable for crimes against humanity.
Right.
But yeah, the trial in itself lasted about 12 days, and at 5:40 on this one day, on the 12th day, I guess, the jury was sent away to deliberate, and 25 minutes later they came back and they announced that they had found Sholom not guilty. And they acquitted him, but he had to pay 1 franc and a fine to the widow and child who were also in the room.
Oh, that fucking rules. It just stonewalls the entire court. Just goes, I did it, and then they make him pay 1 franc.
Okay, but don't do it again. Oh my God. And people were just laughing and cheering in the courtroom, and they're like, yeah, this is Paris. That's one of the quotes. Which I'm like, yeah, Paris strong.
Yeah, this is Paris, motherfucker. That's like when someone yells in, like, Omaha or whatever.
Honestly, people always talk about Paris as being, it's like, oh, it's a cosmopolitan city, but it's just like this courtroom in particular, it's like, oh, it sounds cool, actually.
No, it sounds like a pro wrestling event or something.
Oh, But yeah, so Simon Pelliora got he was a little bitch who couldn't take a few bullets, but people have held on to his Ukrainian nationalists have been humping his corpse for the past 90 years, essentially, because they're quite bitter and they're haters.
Yeah, that sounds like they're haters to me. What a lame thing to even be still like. How do people even still know about this, you know?
It's weird because it's become more prevalent because, as noted luminary of our time, Chelsea Clinton said, Eastern Europe has taken down 13,000 of their Lenin statue. Let's take down ours. Because the thing is, they're taking down the statues of Lenin, but they're replacing him with statues of bimbos like Simon.
Oh, bimbo Simon. Simon Petriorla with huge tits.
I'm going to force femme every nationalist.
Hell yeah. That'll be in the movie. I'm going to make this movie. This is my new life goal, is to make an action movie out of Sholom Schwartzbard.
Yeah, but so the story doesn't end here, and that he then was just free to go, but he wanted to go to Israel or Palestine at the time, and they wouldn't let him because they're like, well, you're innocent, but you're not that innocent, so we're not going to let you go, but you can go to America and South Africa, I guess. And he died in South Africa at 54.
Wow.
And he was a poet. He did continue writing poetry, and his name in Yiddish was the Dreamer, which he made his dreams come true.
He really did. Well, the secret, everyone. Make a vision board, I suppose.
God, the original vision board, his mind.
Oh, man. Well, that is an awesome story. Thank you for sharing it with us. I had never heard it until you told me.
Oh, my God. I first heard about it because there was an article that had come out talking about the fact that they put up a statue of Simon Petliura in the historically Jewish quarter of Vinnytsia, Ukraine. And the statue itself is weird because it's one of those ones
where...
It's
got huge tits.
He's sitting on a bench and he looks like Walt Disney. But it's like Walt Disney if he'd been able to kill all the Jews.
I hate bench statues. You're supposed to sit down next to them and the guy's got your arm around you or his arm around you or whatever. It feels really weird.
Absolutely perverted. Hate it.
He's like a Ronald McDonald statue.
But they are still calling
Sholom. A hot dog in his lap.
At the time when it was first came out, they called him a Russian outside agitator, and he's he's a part of the Red Army, all of the resistance people back then.
Yeah, time never changes.
And but nowadays they're still saying they call him a Russian-born Jew, and it's he was from Ukraine. That's the point. But no, anyway, Sholom Schwartzbard, real strong, my boyfriend, all those things.
Yeah, I feel you. Hell, I want to be my boyfriend.
Sholom Schwartzbard's poly now.
Oh, yeah, welcome to the polycule, Sholom.
Oh, but eventually he died in South Africa, and then Israel had him exhumed and buried on a mountain. So that happened too.
Okay.
So the story with his corpse also didn't end for a while.
Oh, wow. They've McCained him around. Well, that's cool.
Yeah. Oh, and there is a notable thing in that Henri Torres then would go on to almost defend Herschel Greenspan, who killed that Nazi officer that was used as a justification for Kristallnacht. And I would recommend looking up
Dreyfus
Herschel Greenspan. No, Dreyfus Affair was earlier, but Henri Torres was connected to that, in that his grandfather started this kind of league against defamation, and knew Emile Zola. So he's considered the more notable one in the family, even though Henri Torres just defended all the assassins. And he had to leave France in 1937, but did return and was part of the Gaullist government.
I like the idea of an assassin lawyer, there's commercials where he's like, have you been injured on the job? Small gun went off in your ankle pocket. Small throwing knife wounds. Let me help you. I'll fight for you. Cool. Well, is there anything else to the story? Should we wrap it up?
We probably can. Like, the one noticeable thing with Herschel Greenspan is that Andre Torres did kind of help him too, because at the time they tried to, the Nazi officer he killed, like, Herschel was pretty directly inspired by Sholom Schwartzbard and was like, yes, I'm an Avenger. But the thing is, he was exiled from Germany, but mostly just to escape at the time, and his family was still alive and actually survived the war, surprisingly. But so he did this to avenge the Jewish people. And before he left, though, people had been spreading rumors that he and the Nazi officer were actually gay together, and it was a lover's fight. And he was like, there's a report of him telling the lawyer, he's like, no, I'm not gay. I'm a virgin. Please bring me a woman. He was 17.
Oh, that rules.
And yeah, but the trial never happened because the thing is, like, so eventually Herschel got it, and why they wanted to do that. So, like, Herschel was transferred to a concentration camp, but they never did the trial, because then he went around to claim, he's like, yeah, we were gay as hell, because it made Goebbels and Hitler very mad. They're like, okay, we can't have this guy saying our man was gay.
Oh my God, that rules.
And then he went, also there was another show trial, so it was just a mess of scheduling, but he went missing in 1943, but then it gets even weirder because his family, collected benefits and claimed he was dead. But the thing is, there was recently a photo unearthed from a 1946 protest of Holocaust survivors, and there's a man there with a 95% facial match. So there's kind of speculation that he might have just, like, after the war, not kind of gone into hiding because he was worried about still being prosecuted.
Cool. Maybe he's still out there.
Maybe.
Cool.
We need him to come back.
We need the bat.
One last gig.
God damn it. Someone make this movie. So many good lines. Like, what was that? A pig and a bat are not the same?
A pig and a, like, it was like a pig and a duck or a pig and a goose are not the same. And it's, yeah, it's I can't remember, but it's like un Goose ne Swine Tavarish.
Just yelling that across a courtroom.
Well, that wasn't from the trial.
No, okay, that was from the incident. Trial's about.
No, it would be a really notable cinematic moment.
Well, I'm gonna take some cinematic directorial liberties with this movie. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. Where should people follow you, or do people not follow you?
I swear to God, if any of you little freaks follow. I'm at Sweet Comrade on Twitter, which is a reference to a Yiddish song. I'm not going to go into it, but it is.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm constantly online. I never stop posting.
Good content. All right.
No, it's all bad. It's all about Pan and Thread being horny.
Good content. I agree. All right. Well, that'll be our episode for the week. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back with a bunch more stuff later in the coming weeks. Thanks, y'all.
Werden gehasst und getrieben, wir werden geplagt und verfolgt, und als nur der Fahr, weil wir lieben, das vorme schmachtende Volk. Wir werden erschossen gehangen, mir räubt uns das Leben, das Recht, der Fahr, weil wir Emes verlangen, und Freiheit für Ohren Knecht. Freiheit für Ohren Knecht. Hated and hunted and driven, turned out and chased from your doors, and only because we have given our love to the weak and the poor. We perish by lash and by fire, your prisons and armies we fill. Our bodies alone may expire, our spirits you never can kill. Our spirits you never can and you'll never defeat us. We fight for the whole human race. Noch einmal mit uns nicht erschrecken.